Tell the truth, Anti-Circs. Tell the truth that no matter what I say, you won't accept it. But I will respond to some of the things that you've said because some of you really mean well. And for those who mean well, I'm your friend, I mean well as well, and I don't begrudge anyone's opinion. I don't want that your opinion should be my opinion. I want people to have their own opinion. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. As I told you, the Torah mandates that we Jewish people circumcise our children. One of the videos that are sent around supposedly shows a child who's screaming and yelling for several minutes in a circumcision. And I wondered about that because I've been to hundreds of circumcisions, not thousands, but hundreds. I've been to many of my own grandchildren. I have two sons, and I have, thank God, more than a dozen grandchildren boys. And I've been to many other circumcisions. Never, ever have the children cried for more than 30 seconds. My latest two grandchildren born to my son in Oak Park, Illinois, the crying lasted no more than 10 to 15 seconds. Unbelievable, but 10 to 15 seconds. The mohel, the circumciser, was an expert, and there was no crying more than that. The children were satisfied, they were appeased. Of course, it hurts, but they didn't cry anymore. And the reason why that child in that video might have cried for such a long time is because the mohel was not an orthodox mohel and was probably using what they call a clamp. That clamp causes the pain, not the circumcision, not the cut, but imagine putting your finger into a door and having that door holding it for minutes on end. That's excruciating pain. That's what a clamp does. Now, there is such a thing as a shield. The shield also holds the foreskin, but does not clamp on it. And it allows for there to be a clean cut without endangering the member, the muscle of the male genital. There is one mohel that I know that does not use a shield. He's the biggest expert in the world, and the children don't cry with him. It's finished in an instant, and after 2 seconds, the children are already not enjoying themselves, but they are not in pain anymore. But he's a very unusual mohel. Most circumcisers use a shield, but the shield does not clamp down on the foreskin, and that's why we don't have that kind of pain and suffering. So that's the reason why you have that on that video. Tell them to get an orthodox mohel, a real mohel. Mohel doesn't have STDs, and a mohel doesn't use a clamp. Now, Captain Bryce argues with me that it's a good thing to have somebody sue his doctor for circumcision. Now, I want to tell you something. If it is a legal thing to do to have circumcision, yes, it's legal to do a kidney transplant, but if you don't need a kidney transplant, that's malpractice. But circumcision is not a kidney transplant. Circumcision was considered a matter of rote, an automatic for most male children in this country up until recently. It still is done for about half of the kids, I believe. And it is not something that is prohibited. It's not something that's considered counterproductive. It's not something that's considered malpractice by doctors. If it were identified as malpractice, you could then sue the person. I wouldn't agree with it, but you could at least sue the person. My objection to the suit was that this was legislating the past. What I mean by legislating the past, something that was perfectly legal before, that was a regular practice before, that the person had no reason to think that there was anything wrong with doing it, and did that, you could not then retroactively, based upon later morality, retroactively sue that person for damages. The same discussion regarding reparations to the black community. Slavery was a horrible thing, no question about it. But you can't go back retroactively, in my opinion, and sue people for an activity that was perfectly legal and acceptable throughout the world. They might have been stupid. They might have been evil. Correct. But that does not make a basis for a lawsuit. You can't go back in time and sue people for something that was an acceptable practice, as bad as it was, as horrible as it was. The same thing is why I don't believe in suing the United States government for activities against Native Americans, unless they violated their own treaties. At that point, they violated their own treaties. They should be held accountable to the treaties that the government made. And there's no question about that. But stuff that is not written in stone, or written in agreement, the fact that they mistreated the Native Americans is without a doubt. However, the Native Americans might have also mistreated the people coming in and precipitated some of the wars. I'm not going to go into that. It's not the big bad American, a white man. There are two sides to that, and I'm not going to go ahead and discuss the merits and demerits of that discussion. The point, though, is that you can't go back and legislate past things. According to this kind of convoluted logic, Captain Bryce, one should hear me. If you have a woman that occasionally does drink, and drinking is harmful for people that are pregnant, but she takes a beer once in a while, and she takes a beer, and later on, for some reason, her child has some condition, and then finds out that she has a picture of her mommy drinking a beer, takes the mommy to court. You can, according to this kind of convoluted logic, sue the mommy for something that was perfectly legal. Now, I know that excessive drinking is a bad thing, but you really cannot go back in past and create rights for something that wasn't there, that didn't have a right at the time. The mother had a right to drink. The fetus should be cared for, but the fetus is not an entity that has rights. The only time it has rights is after it's born. We should give protection to the fetus. But suing as an entity, it has to be a legal entity in order to be able to sue. You can't create a legal entity that's a non-entity, especially as long as you have abortion on the books. The reason why you can have abortion is because you're saying it's a non-entity. You can't go ahead and then make that back. But according to Captain Bryce, yeah, you could, because this lady knows that drinking would be bad, and you should really stick it to her. And the same thing would be true if you know you've got a Tay-Sachs gene or sickle cell anemia gene or some other gene for some kind of genetic difficulty that can create problems with children, and this person has a child, and the child grows up and has some deformity. And the child could then sue the parent for neglect. Even though it's perfectly legal for them to have sex and mother got pregnant and so on and so forth, she was married, didn't do any sin, didn't do any crime. Yeah, it's a certain amount of negligence. They've taken a risk, but you can't go ahead and legislate for something that is not a prohibited item, unless specifically told by the authorities that if they were to have a child, that they could be sued or that they could be prosecuted. You really can't make a legislation backwards for people's decisions if those decisions are as bad as they may be, as long as they're legal. And that's my opinion on it. I think that it is just insanity, because the amount of frivolous lawsuits that this opens up is just unbelievable. People with more creative minds than mine will find hundreds of ways to sue people based on this particular case, and this case should have been thrown out because it's insanity. There is no circumcision is legal. Circumcision is an ordinary procedure. That's an acceptable procedure. It may be a controversial procedure, but it's an acceptable